Today, I'm lucky enough to be talking with one of Australia's best up-and-coming sailors in the laser radial class. She's competed around the world and has made the Australian sailing team in 2019. She is qualified for the Tokyo 2021 Olympics, and she's here chatting with me today. Thank you for joining me today, Mara Stransky.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's go back straight to the beginning, because you've had a really interesting childhood in the sense that it's always been about the water, that you've grown up with your family around the water on boats. Can you talk me through it a little bit?
I guess from an Olympic sailing perspective, I've had a fairly unconventional upbringing. When I was born, my parents were sailing around the world on an Adams 13, so quite a small monohull. And my mum flew back to Australia to have me here. So from 4 months old, I've lived on a boat, something that I continue to do when I'm at home to this day. So that's been all a bit different. I spent most of my childhood sort of cruising around, living on the boat, doing distance education, and sort of, I guess, just living the life in a lot of ways. But I didn't actually get into sailing dinghies until I was 16. So I guess it's fairly late for an Olympic class. But yeah, definitely have done a lot of sailing, but just sort of came in backwards, I guess.
Did you get a chance to experience many other sports as a kid being on the boat, or was it always clear that if there was ever one, it was going to be water-based?
I did spend a couple of years while my dad was building the boat that we live on now, living on a small island, and it being quite a small community, I kind of got around all the sports that were played. So I did gymnastics for quite a while. I danced, I played soccer, played cricket, wasn't very good at it. I think I always knew that if I did end up in a sport, it would be a water-based sport. But yeah, I did enjoy just getting around as much as I could.
As a kid, do you kind of recognize how different it is growing up on the water in a sense? Because it's all you know, but I guess to the rest of us, it's quite a unique lifestyle.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's kind of normal. So it, yeah, I don't find it as confounding as a lot of people seem to when I tell them that that's how I live. But yeah, you do come to appreciate the differences as you get older in um, just how my day-to-day life operates, even just in terms of going shopping. Like for me, going grocery shopping is quite an ordeal. You don't just get in your car, drive to the shops, get your groceries, come home, unpack them, put them in the fridge. It's more of you have to find an anchorage where there's a grocery shop that's nearby. You've got to row ashore, walk to the shops, usually get lost along the way, get as much as you can carry, which obviously, as everyone knows, is really hard. Then walk it all back to the dinghy, load it all in, take it back out to the boat. Usually gets really wet along the way, so you have to take off all the wet packaging, and then reorder, put some in the very small fridge, some in the long-term storage, and it takes quite a lot of hours really. But yeah, so it is quite different. But to me, I guess it is just my normal, so I don't really notice it unless asked questions like that, I guess.
Any times did those shopping trips end in a bit of disaster? Did anything end up overboard?
Nothing's ever ended up overboard, but many a time the shops have been a lot further away than we thought, and it's been hours and hours of walking. But yeah, I don't know if that was by design on my parents' behalf or just out of pure ignorance. But yeah, spent a lot of time walking to the shops.
Did you enjoy that lifestyle as a kid though? Was it kind of liberating in a sense, just be able to, I guess, kind of roam free around the country and around the world?
Yeah, I think I I loved it. It's sort of, I've always had a lot of freedom. I guess living in quite a confined space, it was important for me to be able to just go off and do my own thing. And my parents had a lot of sort of trust that I'd be responsible enough to not do anything stupid. So I've always had that freedom, which I don't know what I would have done without. um, yeah, I think I was really lucky to get to experience so many different cultures growing up, and just to get to see so much of the the world, I guess. Especially right now, you don't realize how much you took for granted when you can't actually go anywhere. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So obviously you've spent a lot of time sailing. I was reading that you did a lot of sailing with your parents as well as part of competitions. I think it was around Southeast Asia a lot. Can you talk me through some of those competitions and what your memories are of those?
Yeah, so we cruised up to Asia in 2011, and we on a 50-foot catamaran, which we did the Asian regatta circuit on for sort of 2.5 seasons. And I think, yeah, being a boat that my dad had designed and built, he really wanted to test its capabilities, and racing to him seemed like the logical way of doing that. And we were, I guess, fairly pleasantly surprised that it actually did really well. Um, and yeah, so winning's fun, and yeah, especially for me and my dad. My mum wasn't super keen, but she was very stoic about it all and came along for the ride. But the events over there are just incredible. There's sort of, the racing is pretty intense, but the onshore activities are even more sort of competitive in a way. Like each night is hosted by a different hotel or resort, and that's always a really big occasion. Each one tries to outdo the previous night. So yeah, all free food and live music and dancing and all that sort of thing. So for like a little 12-year-old kid, it was sort of, I just felt like I was living in some giant moving carnival. So I was having the time of my life, and it really, I guess, was where I started to enjoy racing competitively. And yeah, I guess it was kind of the start of a lot of things, really.
Did you find you always had that competitive spirit? Like before, one of the first things you said was, I love the winning aspect of it. Like, was that always there as a kid?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that your
definitely. I
is that your
remember
dad? Your dad that's influenced that?
probably, yeah. He always used to be sort of my training partner when I was training for athletics carnivals, and he always beat me, and it was really frustrating. But yeah, it did mean that, yeah, it was the push that I think I needed, and spent my whole life trying to just get that bit better.
So was sailing always something that you did with your family and with your parents? Were they always encouraging you to try and learn the ropes and things like that?
Kind of. I think I would have had a bit on if I didn't enjoy it, given that that's how we sort of lived. Um, yeah, and they definitely sort of wanted to encourage me to know what I was doing so that I was safe, but also having a good time. Um, we did have dinghies, but it took me quite a while to sort of warm up to them and decide that I actually wanted to sail them by myself. Sort of kind of too scared for quite a while.
What about all the other aspects of a regular childhood? You kind of said at the start about how, in an Olympic perspective, it's not a regular backstory that you've got. What about things like going to school, interacting with others, interacting with other competitors? What sort of experiences did you get with those things as a child?
Um, well, as I said, we did live on a small island for the period while my dad was building our boat. So for that time, I went to the local primary school, and um, that was fantastic. But I still have quite a lot of friends that I made there, and they it was quite a small community, so that was a really tight group. And yeah, I guess that part was all fairly normal. And then while we were overseas, as we were sort of part of that regatta circuit, you kept seeing a lot of the same people. So definitely always had quite a lot of social interaction going on. It was different, but I guess, as you say, it was my normal at the time, so I never really thought that much of it. Often we'd have sort of friends and people kind of fly out from Australia to race with us as well, so that was quite handy. And then when I did move back to Australia, I was doing distance education, so I didn't have that social interaction, but I did start sort of sailing straight away. So yeah, made quite a lot of friends through that. But yeah, it has been quite different, but obviously I don't know what it would have been like otherwise, so I don't really have anything to compare against, but I don't really feel as though I've missed out on too much.
When did you first sort of get the urge to race a bit more individually? Like, obviously you spent that time racing with your parents in Southeast Asia, but when were you like, okay, it's time for me to have a go myself? And what are your memories of that?
I think probably when I started disagreeing with the calls that were being made on the boat. um, we came back to Australia to do the multi-hull nationals in 2014, and I remember a couple of moments where I couldn't understand why we were doing the things we were doing, and I guess that was sort of what prompted getting my own boat. And by all means, I was probably wrong, but that that gave me the incentive to just get to make my own decisions and be responsible for them myself, whether they were right or wrong.
And were your parents supportive in that though? They were like keen to get you out there as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think they thought it was a good idea for me to sort of develop some of those individual skills, and also I think it was part of their um, push to get me involved with other people my age, because I had spent a long time with a lot of people who weren't my age, and they wanted to sort of make that transition back into, I guess, a more normal life, a bit smoother.
Now, when you went individual and like you started racing individually, was it always with the dinghies in the radial laser class? Was that where you first started and sort of where you are now?
Well, my first dinghy was an ancient laser, but we were sort of still based in North Queensland at the time, and there were a lot of smaller clubs there, so I was got a full rig because everyone else had a full rig, and that's the men's class, and I was like I don't know, 55 kilo girl, which is completely not right for that. But yeah, as I said, didn't like losing, and if it was under about 5 knots, I was an absolute weapon. Anything more than that, and I was upside down probably 80% of the time. But eventually after a couple of months, somebody saw me upside down. It's like, what are you doing here? Get in a radial and at least try that, and sail with people who are in the same boat as you. So it has been, I guess, the only dinghy I've sailed really.
There was a really interesting quote, I think it was on the AOC website that I saw, that about the Radial Youth Worlds in 2016, where you were saying, I'd never seen that many boats before. I couldn't find the starting line. Was it kind of surreal competing in those big events?
Yeah, that definitely was. I was really out of my depth. I legitimately couldn't find the start line in the first race, and I, for some reason, didn't clue on that everyone else was probably on it and I was probably wrong. But yeah, so that event was pretty eye-opening for me in 2016. But yeah, I'd like to think I've come a bit of a way since then.
Was that one of your first sort of big international events competing by yourself?
Yeah, that was my first international event. Yeah.
And what did that involve? So who traveled with you? What was it like getting everything to the event?
Well, I traveled by myself, but I was pretty lucky that I guess I had like a host family when I got there. So they looked after me pretty well, but it was just me, and there were other people that I knew there, obviously, and they helped me out quite a lot. But yeah, it was a little bit daunting just going to the other side of the world by yourself when you didn't really have much idea what you're doing. You didn't really know anyone very well.
And you would have still been in your mid teens, I guess, at that point. So what sort of age range of people are you competing against, and what was that experience like of the actual competition once you found the start line?
Well, as it was a youth worlds, no one was over 18, and I think I would have been 17. So I wasn't that young. I was just super inexperienced. But yeah, the rest of the Australian team that was there, including one of my teammates, Zoe Thompson, who actually won the Worlds, they were really welcoming and very helpful. So yeah, that made it a lot easier. And yeah, everyone was pretty much my age anyway.
The next year, I think it's the Radial Worlds in Medemblik that you go and compete in. I'm pretty sure from what I've read, you placed pretty high in a quality field. That wasn't the youth. That was the worlds, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that would have been my second international event. And it was, I don't know who was most surprised, but on day two, I went out and got a second and a first in the open field, and it was hugely shocking. And all of a sudden, I'd skyrocketed into the top 10. Um, I came down the next day knowing that no one else there had had a better day than I had, and thought I was on top of the world, and then ended up getting pumped that day. So it didn't last very long, but just having that confidence, knowing that I could piece together an entire day better than anyone else when I still really didn't know what I was up to, actually helped me through a lot of the tougher times in the coming couple of years.
Can you talk me through, for those who might not quite know, what a typical day of competition might be? Like how many times you're out in the water, how many times you're racing?
Well, generally, for us, an event is 5 or 6 days long, and each day we aim to do 2 races. But if for some reason the wind conditions don't line up and we can't do some races on one day, then we'll do extra on another day. So generally we wouldn't do more than 3 races, but we can have multiple days where we don't race at all because there's no wind or too much wind or something like that. So yeah.
And how long would a typical race be, for example, at the Worlds? How far are you racing in one of those races?
Generally, a typical race length is a 50-minute time limit. So that's the target, but it can be sort of 40 minutes or even up to an hour. Yeah.
Well, I guess the big thing that we have to kind of move towards is your selection in the Olympic team. I guess before we touch on that, do you have many memories of the Olympics as a kid, and what do you have any lasting sort of images in your head of going, "Oh wow, these are Olympians. This is pretty cool to be a part of those people I looked up to when I was younger"?
Yeah, I think it was always a pretty big thing in my head. I know every year when it was on, I'd be there like every day around school, or whenever I could get to a TV, I'd be there watching. And I sort of, as a really young kid, sort of thought that I really wanted to go, and I didn't know which sport. I just had to decide on the sport as though that was going to be the easy part. Um, but I did always have that ambition in there somewhere, but there wasn't really a whole lot of structure around how I might actually do that. But yeah, they definitely Olympians have always been people that I've looked up to for sure.
What was the reason that you had that made you want to go to the Olympics? Was there anything that in particular that stood out? Was it the ceremonies? Was it just how big the event was? Was there anything you went, that's why I want to be there?
I think like all of those things for sure, like add to that desire, but just more than anything, I thought that it was the ultimate in sporting achievement to reach a level where you could represent your nation at the Olympic Games. Just the idea of that level of mastery of your particular discipline, and the idea of being the best. And obviously now that I've sort of made that selection, there's a lot more to it, I've realized. But that was what was driving me, I guess.
Are there any athletes in particular that you remember watching on TV or seeing highlights of and going, wow, they're pretty special in particular?
Um, oh, it's pretty hard not to go past Usain Bolt.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
I've watched all of his races multiple times. But yeah, there's just so many impressive athletes that you can go through.
How early on when you started kind of sailing individually, did you go, okay, the ultimate goal is to be competing at the Olympics and eventually and hopefully win a medal?
Honestly, I didn't really think of it at all when I first began, because I had come in so late, and most people my age had already been in the class for a number of years and had done multiple nationals and even worlds and things. So it wasn't on my radar at all. I guess once our Rio Olympian retired, I think it maybe sort of became a little bit more of a thing in my mind, but it really wasn't until sort of like I wouldn't have thought of wanting to compete unless I thought that I'd reached a certain standard, and in my mind I hadn't reached that standard yet. So probably not until 2019 did it actually become a reality in my head. Yeah.
In 2019, of course, you make the Australian sailing team. I think that's for the first time. What was sort of involved in making that team, and what was that moment like? And did it feel like a culmination of sort of everything you'd achieved to that point?
Yeah, kind of. It was a little bit surreal even looking back on it, because I'd had a particularly bad year the year before. So I'd actually been dropped from all forms of squad. So I was sort of just a state athlete who took myself overseas, um, and had a pretty good first event. Sort of, we didn't have a coach, so we were just floundering around, and I made the medal race. And then we did have a coach for the second two events, and I guess having that bit of momentum and in general the squad performing quite well um, really helped. And then my second event was reasonably good as well. Um, and then in the final event, our European Championships, where it's sort of one of the biggest fleets you'll see in laser sailing, I I don't think I really went in with any expectations, and yeah, each day sort of climbed the leaderboard a little bit more. And yeah, I honestly am not even quite sure how it happened, but and I didn't even know after I'd finished the event that I had made the Australian sailing team until Blackers, the head coach, came up and congratulated me, and I think I was a little bit dazed. So yeah, it's probably kind of an underwhelming story. It just sort of happened by accident.
But I guess it's a quick escalation from there, because a year later you've qualified for the Tokyo Olympics. I mean, that sort of goal that you had from a kid going, I want to get there, you finally achieved. Can you talk me through sort of the qualification process and that eventual phone call that you get going, hey, you're going to Tokyo?
Yeah. Well, we had a point score system. Obviously, there's certain results that if you achieve them, then you've qualified objectively, and that's that. And it had been really close on a number of occasions, but hadn't quite made that objective qualification. And if that is the case, then it's quite an extended process of sort of an application. And obviously, everyone involved in making that decision knows exactly what your results have been um, in the past. And that was sort of drawn out over a week. And then obviously, with a whole lot of COVID related issues, that got extended to 2 weeks. And in that time where I knew that my whole next year, and as it turns out 2 years, sort of were hanging on that one decision, I was super stressed and took up every form of physical activity I could think of. Like I even took up running, which I detest. Cycle every day, I'd run, I'd like do all these other random things to try and distract myself, give myself haircuts. And then finally I did get that phone call and was told I was going, and it was such a relief. But yeah, it was also, I don't know. Yeah, it was a pretty big day.
How far was it in between finding out you were going and finding out the games were postponed? Because I know I was down in Sydney when some of the squad were announced, and Ian Chesterman was there being pestered with questions going, are the games going ahead? Are the games going ahead? And I think it was a mere a week or so away from the games being cancelled. How close was it for you?
Um, yeah, I think it was less than 2 weeks. I know it hadn't really even sunk into my own head properly that I was going. So yeah, it wasn't even that much of an adjustment to me. Like I hadn't actually realized that I was going that year before I was going a year later. So yeah, it was quite close.
And I've seen sort of quotes from you at the time kind of saying that in a way you were glad because it gave you 12 more months to prepare. Can you just talk me through that a bit and why you were sort of grateful for the chance to spend a bit more time honing your craft ahead of Tokyo?
Well, yeah, like I was quite grateful for the postponement, because for me at the time, I'd only really been campaigning in the laser for 4 years, and the extra year made that 5, and like that's a really big percentage increase. And in my mind, that was a fantastic opportunity. And given that I was considering, or I was planning on continuing until 2024 at least anyway, it didn't really change like my life plan, as it obviously was doing for other people who were planning on retiring. So it wasn't a huge upset for me, and much more of an opportunity, I thought. So yeah.
Besides not traveling to Japan, did the whole of what happened last year in 2020 change your life much, in terms of you probably would have stayed on the boat, you probably would have done a lot of things similar to how you eventually ended up training, preparing for this year?
Yeah, I mean, it at the time we didn't really realize how much it would change the course of a normal year. Um, Usually we spend 4 or 5 months overseas each year, and we didn't spend any time at all. Um, but as we couldn't travel overseas, we did have to sort of adapt and travel within Australia quite a lot more. But even that was fraught with quite a lot of difficulties, obviously with border closures and all that sort of thing. So I ended up spending a lot more time at home than I usually would, which was interesting. And I've sort of had quite a lot of coach changes, so there was a bit of adaptation to happen there. It was really different, but I think we've been really lucky to still be able to train pretty much as normal throughout the whole year. And yeah, at times it's hard when you can see that everyone in Europe is actually racing against each other and they're all together in a fleet, but there's not really anything we can do about that other than just carrying on.
What's the focus of your preparation when you can't be racing and you're seeing all those other teams racing over in Europe? I mean, there's some great video of you training on your yacht as the swell kicks up and you're trying to hold onto the handlebar. I mean, is it more about that sort of individual strength training? How do you can keep getting that competitive spirit going when you don't have the competition to, I guess, put it into practice in?
Yeah, well, I think the physical side of things is something you can always work on, whether there are other people around or not. So that has been quite a big focus. It also gives you something tangible that you feel like you're achieving, and you can see the results. So that's really nice, and I've spent quite a lot of time working on that in the last 12 months. And when we're actually quite lucky to have a relatively strong domestic fleet of lasers in Australia. So whenever possible, trying to get as many of them together as we can, and at least practice some racing scenarios, practicing more sort of combative, I guess, styles of sailing with less boats, but just keeping them all really close together. But yeah, the physical side of it is a big thing, and sort of just trying to work on anything you can without a huge fleet of boats.
Do you feel like you've developed a lot as a sailor over the last 12 months, even though you haven't, I guess, had these competitions to compete in as regularly?
I'd like to think so, but it's a little bit hard to sort of to know exactly, given that you can't really check in and see a difference in results. But yeah, in terms of speed and all those types of things that we can actually measure, like I feel I've progressed, but obviously putting it all together and racing overseas is the only way to actually check. So it'll be really exciting when we can do that.
What motivates you to train? Is there any particular goal or something that you want to achieve that, say it's a cold, miserable morning, that you just go, okay, this is why I'm getting out of bed and this is why I'm training today?
Well, I think we're really lucky to have quite a strong squad of laser radial sailors in Australia, and that's not something that I don't in my life. Well, in the time that I've been following sailing, I've never seen that before, and I think that's really cool to have been a part of, given that all the girls involved now I've sort of come all the way through with. And I think just building that squad and that culture and having, I guess, building the class in Australia gives me a lot of motivation, knowing that I'm part of something much bigger than just my own individual sailing. And yeah, just if I'm not putting in to the maximum of my potential, then I'm not giving the squad as much as I could be. So yeah, I really find it easier to motivate myself with other people rather than just my own personal improvement or gain or that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, no, I really like that answer. And I guess even though it's an individual sport in terms of when you're out there on the water, you must really feel like you're part of this collective team representing Australia.
Yeah, definitely. And Australia has a very proud history in sailing. So like there's pretty big shoes to fill when you're part of that team. So yeah, you've really got to make sure you're ticking all the boxes to give it your best when it matters.
How are you feeling about Tokyo this year? I mean, obviously the world's still a very uncertain place. There's still plenty of concerns around, but for you personally, do you have any concerns about going over there or competing?
Um, Personally, like obviously there's a huge number of people who are not getting a whole lot of sleep and haven't been for many, many months. And I have a lot of faith that they're doing all they can to make sure that should the games proceed, as everyone involved in running the event is pretty confident they will, that it will be done in a safe manner for the competitors and the communities. So I personally don't have any worries about that. And yeah, it's really hard to, I guess, know what will happen, but I'm sure whatever does happen will be a huge success, just getting the events to run at all. Um, yeah, and I personally just can't wait.
I mean, one of the things about sailing is there's been a bit of talk about the whole Enoshima Yacht Harbour and competing there. What are your thoughts on the venue, and are you looking forward to competing in this, I guess, very different style of venue to what we might have seen in other Olympics?
Yeah, I mean, been to I've been to quite a few events in Enoshima, and I really like it. Um, I really enjoy the Japanese people's way of organizing events, and I think they're incredibly thorough and efficient. And in any normal year, that would just be a bonus. But in this year where that's really required, I couldn't think of a better um, place or people to sort of make that all run smoothly. Um, yeah, I really enjoy the venue, and I enjoy that you can get sort of any conditions. And yeah, really excited to get back there hopefully soon.
Now, I think from looking at the schedule that sailing does start relatively early on in the Olympic sort of calendar for Tokyo. So hopefully that means for you, you will be able to go to the opening ceremony. I bet that's something you're looking forward to being involved in.
Well, yeah, I think generally in any normal year, sailors wouldn't go to the opening ceremony just because it is really quite close to our event starting. And yeah, so it was never actually a plan to go, which obviously is a tough call. But yeah, I think especially in these times, it's sort of not having that as a plan anyway makes it a lot easier to accept not going. But yeah,
And you feel
can always
okay
watch
with,
reruns.
and then you've got to fly out, what is it, 48 hours after competition? That'll be a
Yeah.
whirlwind, I imagine, getting home.
Oh, for sure. I mean, usually the flights home are a bit of a whirlwind anyway, but yeah, it'll be, and it's not that unusual flying out sort of 48 hours after your competition. It's usually sort of a finish your event and get out before the accommodation gets really expensive. um, so yeah, so that's kind of normal, but I'm sure it will be a huge whirlwind regardless of when I flew out.
What are your expectations for Tokyo? What are you wanting to achieve, especially now that you've had, I guess, this extra 12 months?
Yeah, well, like, as I guess you've sort of said, it's really hard to know where you're stacking up relative to an international fleet at the moment. So I'm trying to avoid putting a number on it at this stage because, yeah, I don't want to undersell myself, but also don't want to sort of make it really hard. My aim personally is just to be really clear on what it is that I've been trying to work on, and making sure that I do everything in my power to execute those things consistently, as well as the things that I already feel comfortable with. So just, yeah, consistently executing everything required to sail my best is my aim. And obviously, like, I'm gonna have to put some more specific words on that. But yeah, that's my plan.
Is there any plan for competition or international competition before the games at this stage, or is it all still very much up in the air?
Well, there are plans, but they're up in the air, as most things are at the moment. We do hope to be able to compete at one event in Europe before going to Japan. But obviously, there's a lot of decisions that still need to be made based on the healthcare systems in the countries that we would like to visit. So nothing's actually locked in yet. And we're just sort of monitoring how it's going over there for the moment. And we'll make a decision sort of in the next month or so about whether or not that goes ahead. And if it does, that'd be fantastic. But if it doesn't, we've got backup plans as well. So that's all right.
The final question I put to athletes when I chat with them, it may seem like a simple one, but hopefully it gets you to reflect on a few things. What are you most proud of in your career or your life to date?
Yeah, it is a good one. I think I'm proud of sort of having come, I guess, not through particularly recognized systems. I'd like to think I'm relatively self-made, both in sort of sailing and in school, for example. Like, I've often sort of come through fairly unorthodox systems and still sort of reached a position where a lot of things are possible. Yeah, so I think that self motivation and self drive, if that's even a term, are some of the things I'm most proud of. But I'll have a bit more of a think about it.
Is that something that you'd kind of like to think if people were to watch you at the Olympics and see how well you go or whatever you may achieve over there, that if they hear the name Mara Stransky, they'll go, that's someone who's really done it herself?
Yeah, I think I'd be happy with that. If they knew my name, I'd be happy with that.
Are you expecting a bit more recognition by the time you're back for the Olympics?
I don't know. I don't think it'll particularly change me all that much. So if I get more recognition, then that's cool. But if I don't, then that also doesn't really bother me.
Well, Mara, I'm sure a lot more people will stand up and take notice for you once you compete in Tokyo. And we wish you all the luck for competing over there. And we can't wait to see you over in the water over there. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much. And thanks for having me today.